Okay, people, this is the last session of the day. No. Can you organize these people? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to introduce the moderator of the panel on wider reach through information and communications technology. The moderator is Stuart Hart, who is a professor at the University of Vermont in a sustainable business program. He's also the founder of Enterprise for a Sustainable World at Cornell, where he once taught, and I once attended one of his conferences back in the early 2000s. Stuart is a noted authority on the effects of environment and poverty on business strategy. He was co-author with C.K. Prahalad of the original Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid paper in 2002, which C.K. Prahalad went on to write a book about. Stuart had his own book, which was rated by Cambridge University as one of the top books on sustainable business, Capitalism at the Crossroads. And so it's my great honor to introduce you to Stuart Hart.
Nicholas, thank you. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Here we are, the final session of the day, huh? Right? Okay, have a seat, have a seat. We'll get started. I think in many ways, this session will be, in some ways, a continuation of the last one, right? Which I thought was a good mix of discussion about women in leadership, but also a healthy dose of digital and ICT. So in some ways, we will build directly on that. But I guess I would begin with the premise that, if I look at the challenge of the Sustainable Development Goals, there aren't too many I can't name single potential technologies that have more catalytic potential than ICT, right? When it comes to really getting after the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals. As an enabling platform, right? It can create options and opportunities and possibilities in so many ways. And obviously we're in the midst of a great race for universal reach, right? I mean, it's happened in Bangladesh, I mean the satellite, but it's happening globally, right? I mean, it's a great race for universal reach, and that's very exciting because, of course, in Bangladesh, we've already witnessed the salutary impact that connectivity can have, right? And of course, Iqbal Kadir, a big part of that with Grameenphone. If we dial back 20 years back, turn the hands back, we can see in the space of 10 years what incredible impact Grameenphone had on Bangladesh, right? From in almost every way, from the standpoint of women's empowerment, from the standpoint of community development, of economic efficiency, of livelihood generation, right? That these are all critically important elements when it comes to the role of ICT in generating actual development or sustainable development. So now we sit here on the cusp of the next wave, right? Which is internet access and universal digital access. And how will that happen? When will that happen? Will it ever happen? How do we get after the addressing the challenge of not just theoretical technical access, but also actual use, and productive use? These will be the questions that we want to chew on right here for the next hour, or maybe a little less, given the late hour. So with that as kind of an overall framing, what I'd like to do is briefly introduce each of the four panelists. Each of them have some remarks, some with PowerPoint, but but I think it'll be well worth it. Then we'll come back, once they've had a chance to make some remarks, and really open up the discussion on that larger question, right? And that larger question is around how do we achieve, the societal goal of complete inclusion, of total inclusion, not just theoretical access, but actual uplift, use and uplift. So let me begin. Anir Chowdhury, who is sitting directly next to me, is the policy advisor to the Access to Information program in the Prime Minister's office. We had a chance to chat briefly, and I think that you'll hear much more about his work in a moment. But he's among those innovators in the public sector, right, who's seeking to really reinvent the bureaucracy and change the way government provides access to services and information. You'll hear much more about that. So welcome. It's great to be, and we'll spend a little bit of time afterwards. Yep. Sonia George, who's Executive Director at the Alliance for Affordable Internet, very much at the confluence of development, communication policy, dealing with legal and regulatory frameworks around affordability and access, and with a special interest, and you heard a question from her in the last session around gender issues and gender equality when it comes to ICT and access. So welcome. Yep. Rahul Habib. Rahul is at Brown University, I think as many of you know from having a look at his bio. He heads up or is deeply involved in the Global Health Initiative and is president of Health and Education for All at Brown, which is a nonprofit with a special focus on garment workers, right? So welcome. And then way down at the end is Mashroof Habib, managing director of, on the side at least, his day job, of course, is board director of Habib Group. And as he said when we were introducing ourselves to each other, I really run an airline, right? That's the real day job. But increasingly, I think not just a distraction, but probably a passion, right? Would be this very interesting new venture, optometry, and we'll hear more about that as well. So with that, let's start off. We'll start with remarks from each, and I guess there's some PowerPoint, right? And let's begin. Yep.
Thank you, Stuart. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll start with the PowerPoint. So the last 10 years, I think we've heard a lot of success stories, a lot of metrics since the morning. And I think these statistics will last us for the next, not just hours, but days and weeks, potentially. We just wanted to show you what has happened by changing the mindset, which we are calling the leapfrogging mindset. In various parts of the government, private sector, we talked about the private sector for the most part throughout the day today, but I'll talk maybe a bit more about the government in ICT. So we've seen poverty reduction, we've seen literacy going up significantly, we've seen electricity going up that we heard for a couple of hours today. And internet, about 100 times expansion in the last 10 years. And mobile phone, about 7.5 times expansion. So dramatic moves, shifts. And we witnessed movement into the space age yesterday. So we are now in space. And we'll be watching ourselves from space. We're connecting ourselves in space also. But the question, the important question, and I'm actually glad that Stuart's here, that what is the fate or the impact on the little guy in the field? So let me talk about an agriculture story. This is a bit of an old story as we started the journey of digital Bangladesh at the clarion call of our Honorable Prime Minister 10 years ago. So this was early on, about 2009 story. E-procurement from a paper-based procurement. So about 200,000 sugarcane farmers in the country used to get their procurement on a piece of paper since the 1930s, which was revolutionized with an SMS. So what that did was that the small farmers benefited because they used to get this piece of paper late, and because of corruption, they would get unfair price because their canes would dry up and they would actually bring the canes late to the sugar mill. So with this SMS, which was generated automatically, no human intervention, their lot was changed. Another one from the university. So this happened in 2010. One university in Bangladesh called Shahjalal University of Science and Technology, which you all know, a team there worked on a very revolutionary piece of technology, again using SMS. So high school graduates would have to apply to public universities by filling out a form. They would have to go collect the form, bring it back to their location, fill it out, put a small picture, passport-size picture, take it back, and then go back again for the examination, and then again go back for the results. So these three, out of the 4 steps of collecting, submitting, taking exams, and getting results, 3 were eliminated because of technology. So the only thing that they could not do with technology was appear for the exams. They had to go. But think of a girl who just passed out of high school applying to multiple universities in Bangladesh, public universities. And her life was completely changed because she could apply to the university just by sending an SMS. She wouldn't have to fill out the whole form because all the information was already with the government. So why would she have to fill out the form again? All she had to do was say, this is my identity. So she had established her identity with the phone, and she sent a mobile money transfer. At that time, in 2010, there was no bKash. We talked about bKash today. There was pre-bKash time, but there was this form of money transfer using airtime as currency. So that was what was used at that time. We set up what are called digital centers across the country, about 5,000 digital centers in local government institutions and another 8,000 plus in post offices. So in the local government centers, these are run by entrepreneurs. So this is a very unique form of public-private partnership at the local level. So we're calling it micro-entrepreneurship. And these centers started with only one service 10 years ago, about 8 years ago when we launched. Now they sell about 116 types of services, ranging from birth registration to land records to passports to banking to different types of training. So these have become a one-stop shop for many different public and private services. And the entrepreneurs generate quite a handsome income in most of these locations. So we are seeing another new thing is called this help desk. This was launched in February, actually April of this year, by Honorable ICT Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister. Anybody can call this number 333 and can get information about the government and can also complain about the government. So thousands of child marriages have been stopped by calling into this number, 333. So this is a revolutionary thing that has happened, again, in the last few months. A very important thing in digitization is changing the process. When we talked about power today, a lot of people talked about, I think Mr. Khalidi talked about in the morning, how the processes are old school and how they need to be changed. So there is an effort, sincere effort by the government, monitored by our cabinet division, to change processes within the government. So we identified about 1,500 critical processes within the government, changed about 200 of them. So this is an example of how one would apply for a land record in a district office, DC office, and how they would get that. So you see here that before digitization, this process was changed. So you digitize the old inefficient process, you get a digitized inefficient process. So you have to first bring efficiency to it and then digitize it. And that's how we saw this one process of the citizens collecting land records from the district office. They don't go to the district office anymore. They apply from the digital centers in their local government institution, which is within walking distance. And this very important thing that we have introduced as a policy directive called TCV, reducing time, cost, and the number of visits for every government service. So you see the TCV reduction in this by simplifying the process, digitizing it, and then decentralizing it to the local government office. An important example from the birth registration I talked about. So in 131 years between 1873 when we started doing birth registration, this was the British times obviously, pre-Bangladesh, pre-Pakistan. In that 131 years we did about 8%, we covered about 8% of our population. In about 12 years, we covered 90% plus of our population just by introducing technology in these digital centers, 5,000 digital centers, run by entrepreneurs. So this is, again, birth registration, a function of the government, outsourced the last mile to a private sector entrepreneur and doing birth registration. And this is 100 times efficiency. So in 100 plus years, we got 8%. In 12 years, we got 90%. So we did a TCV study last year, and we saw that across 90 different services, the savings was about 1.2 billion person days in 2017 alone, about $2.9 billion, and 471 million visits that did not take place because of digitization. This number will go up in 2021 to about 5 billion person days, $39 billion, and 1.1 billion visits. Now, the important question here is how do we monetize it to present this as business opportunities? So maybe Bida, Beza could also help here. An example of how the HR problem, we have 70 teacher training colleges and about close to 1 million teachers. So you can understand that the inefficiency in our teacher training process and the frequency with which teacher training happens, which is maybe in the life of a 30-year career of a teacher, he or she gets trained maybe twice. With this teachers portal, it's a social media platform for teachers. We started with 23 teachers. In 6 years, it grew to about 300,000 teachers. We still have another 600,000 to cover. So they teach each other to this platform. So again, a technology where the HR scarcity problem is being addressed using technology. We talked about fintech today, and Bikash is a glowing example from Bangladesh, globally now, of how fintech is helping money transfer. But what is not happening is real financial inclusion in terms of savings, loans. And if you look at electronic payment in Bangladesh, by volume it's only less than 6%, and by value it's about 12%. So there is a long runway for digital financial inclusion that we can actually do by connecting the Bangladesh Bank's payment switch and the Election Commission's national ID. So that's what we are trying to do right now. This year we're starting a pilot where this whole thing will become electronic. So a lot of payments will start becoming electronic starting next year. Disability issues. So technology actually serves the persons with disability in a huge way. This one example from CRP, which is a famous center for disabled persons, for rehabilitation of them. So using technology, they have actually expanded to 6 locations for the first time in their long history. All our textbooks have turned into digital talking books, which is navigable. Again, this is something that our National Textbook Board has adopted, and this is distributed to all visually challenged students every year for the last 3 years. We set up this thing called the iLab. This is the innovation lab which does incubation. So there are 50 projects of different types that are being incubated by iLab right now. As the satellite was being launched yesterday, a small achievement also happened in Malaysia. 3 of these projects actually won 2 gold medals and 1 silver medals in different categories. One was a centralized nebulizing system for the healthcare. Another was creation of diesel from plastic, throwaway plastics. And the third is a portable infant incubator. So again, these things are happening using technology, some using IoT actually. This is an example of how social media is bringing the government closer to the people. So this is social action triggered by in this case, in a remote district in Borisal, southern district of the country. A university student talked about a canal that was being dumped with wastage. And she said that, can we not clean this up? The district administration came forward, and there was mass people's action. They cleaned up the canal in a couple of days. The same thing then got replicated in another district called Tangail, where they started cleaning up a whole river, a 23-kilometer river. So again, social action triggered by technology. We know all the ills of Facebook, but this is a positive action that has happened in Bangladesh. In 2016, the UN e-governance index actually moved us 24 points. We're still quite low. We're 124 out of maybe 177 nations that they survey. But that year, ours was the single biggest jump, 24 points in 2016. We're waiting for the 2018 results. And we've been getting a World Summit on the Information Society, WSIS Award for 5 years in a row since 2014. Let me actually talk about the last thing that I talked about. This is our newest venture, a smartphone for the illiterate. So creating a Bangla Siri or an Alexa, which will serve primarily first the farmers, of which we have about 70 million, and then the expatriate workers, which we have about 10 million in different countries. And most of the expatriate workers have smartphones. The farmers don't, but in the next 2 years, by which this technology would become mature, they'll have this. So this is, again, helping the different agricultural needs, helping the needs of the expatriate workers in different countries. So this is the newest venture. The 6 paradigm shifts that we have actually seen in Bangladesh, in all these things that have happened. The first one is that a role reversal has taken place, where we are saying that services will come to citizens instead of citizens going to services. So this is a very important shift. The second one is the Big Bang approaches of using technology to create social and economic impact in the lives of the little guy really has not worked. So the bottom-up iterative, and this is where I think Stuart can talk a lot about this, has really helped. And then you actually bring in policy actions, scale up things. So those have happened, but you start with the bottom. Debt to silo. A lot of the things that I talked about required many government departments to come together and work together, which did not happen before. ICTs enable that to happen. End of subsidies. This is where we are saying that we have to come up with business models. So the private sector has to come in and work with the government to provide the last mile service delivery. So again, subsidized models have to stop. And as we become a middle income country, we have to stop it anyway, so might as well do it in a proactive way. This idea of govpreneurship, creating entrepreneurship mindset within the government is also taking hold. We are saying that it is okay to fail within government, and you learn through your failures. And the last thing is creation of positive competition. Within the government, as a policy matter, we actually have created a sense of positive competition within districts, within departments, within ministries. And the bureaucrats are actually competing for excellence today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. I mean, that's a lot for us to chew on at some point very soon. But before we do that, please, let's proceed.
I feel like we should start talking about all these fantastic
Yeah, I do
things
too,
that-
but I'm resisting the temptation.
Okay, so you already said a little bit. So I lead the Alliance for Affordable Internet, which is a global coalition of public, private, and civil society organizations that have come together to work primarily on how to and to make it possible to reduce the cost of broadband access, focusing primarily on policy and regulatory reform. We are part of the Web Foundation, where I also lead our digital inclusion program. And so as you've heard from Stuart earlier, so we're not just interested in reducing the cost of broadband because for the reasons that you saw that are so important that Anir already mentioned, but we want to make sure that as we do that, we bring access to everyone, not just some, but we also make sure that that access results in what we like to say meaningful use. So what's important when we talk about these things are, for example, in Bangladesh, which is the country that we are focusing on today, we have had incredible progress, incredible new thinking and vision being implemented in the country, but there are still a lot of barriers that are actually preventing that vision from being implemented fully. So for example, the work that Anir is leading on the Access to Information program, and that he mentioned a few examples, what we want to see is that scaling up much faster. So the reality in your country, despite all of the progress that we've heard today, and I apologize that I also have to be the bearer of not such great news, is let's look at the facts, right? And the facts is, yes, there's been great progress, but the fact is right now, only about 20% of Bangladeshi actually have access and have the ability of purchasing access to the internet. Access to the internet that is reliable and that they can afford. So that means that there's about 80% of people in your country that actually cannot benefit from that potential access. Some of them can benefit because of the kinds of centers and the kinds of programming that access to information and many others, including, for example, projects that some of you that are here in the room have been supporting. Sonia mentioned a few earlier in the previous panel, the other Sonia, and some other colleagues. But the reality is that a lot of those projects actually are not moving as fast as we would like to see. So in Bangladesh, while there are some very good examples of, for example, the centers, the digital centers, that are providing incredible service, the reality is that the majority of your population is actually not benefiting from those services. Those who have access to it benefit, but the majority are not there yet. So we work on specifically policy and regulatory frameworks with the partners in Bangladesh, the operators, the government, civil society, to change that picture and try to put the policy framework on a fast-track path, that will allow for these kinds of possibilities to become real. And when I say all, and when I talk about inclusion, that's why you heard me also asking the question earlier. And when I say everyone in Bangladesh, I really mean everyone. Because right now, Bangladesh is very similar to other countries in the region, in the Southeast Asia region, where women in your country are, first, 50% less likely to use the internet than men. When they come online, the few that have access, which, by the way, close to 30% gap exists in access to the internet for those who can actually come to online services. But when women go online and actually have access, they are 30 to 50% less likely to use access to technology, access to centers, access to all of these services that you just heard in the presentation, and the possibilities that creativity, production, etc. may bring to them. So the fact is, there's many people in your country that are very close to being at that point where they can have access that can be productive, creative, innovative, meaningful. They cannot afford. The centers that can provide public access at either free or low cost, as A2I is developing, some of them actually don't have connectivity that facilitates that, because what's happening? There's just not enough coordinated investment in infrastructure to make sure that all the pieces are there. So you asked, what are we passionate about? I'm passionate about in our work to change that picture. A picture where if the policy framework is preventing investors from investing in infrastructure, and that infrastructure doesn't exist for this kind of programming that is so positive to continue to grow, that's a problem. So we want to change that. And we're working in partnership to change that picture. Hopefully, not just so that all of you that are in the room, we are all the privileged, right, about having access, but those who don't have can also benefit from those opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And now, Rahul, I think you have some slides, right? While he's getting set up, is there a quick question about what we've heard so far? Anyone have a burning question on their mind? Is everybody ready for a cocktail?
It's a long day.
I have a question that you probably can't answer, but we heard about power went from 27% coverage to 82% coverage in 10 years, right? And I remember in the mid 2005, 2006, there was a big push for internet cable and internet, rural internet and all that stuff. Obviously, that didn't happen. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that we just saw from Munir that the power penetration went from 27% to 82% in 10 years. And I remember in 2005 and 6 when Bangladesh was bringing in overseas cables for internet and pushing out rural electrification. So I'm just kind of wondering why it didn't happen, or if it did not happen, or what. There's some disconnect there. Because it was flipped before. It was power was nowhere and internet was going everywhere, and now. Yeah.
Should we answer that
Quick
now?
one, and then a quick one, and yeah, go ahead real
you want
quickly.
one?
Yeah.
Okay. So actually, Anita and I actually speak a lot about these things all the time. And there's a few things, and we can go on later, but
Yeah.
a few important points is that unlike power, traditionally the ICT sector and the communication sector, starting from basic telephony, has been a private sector industry, okay, with a very rapid growth of mobile telephony, right? We all got very accustomed to the fact that the private sector was investing, the growth was really fast. And then once that was there, to a certain extent, there's still a long way to go there as well, so don't take me wrong. When the internet came along, everyone was under the impression that the same kind of development would take place. Well, the reality is that the kind of investments that are required are actually quite different. They're not as low cost as they might appear. And frankly, the sector as a whole, and this is all of the stakeholders, are very much used to the fact that, and take the thinking that private sector will take care of it. And we know that that's not the case. That's why public-private partnerships are so critical, to change that mindset. And I won't be able to talk too much about it today, but since you all actually, as I said, are the privileged to have access to the internet, go to our website and look at one of the latest reports that we just published with colleagues. I chaired the working group on multilateral development banks, working with multilateral development banks about their investments in ICT. And one of the things that we discovered, just to give you an idea, is that of all of the development that takes place, the power industry receives the greatest majority of all the investment, not just from governments, but from multilateral development banks. The ICT sector gets just barely 1% of multilateral development bank investment. And of that 1%, an even smaller percentage of that goes to policy and regulatory frameworks, which are the foundation for attracting investment, creating all of the enabling environment that investments that are made possible.
Yeah.
So that mindset is
interesting.
very different in the power sector.
Because it's a different way of thinking about
It's
power.
a different way
Yeah.
of thinking. It's not
Yeah.
just about the
Yeah.
private sector, but it's about partnerships. So we're
Yeah.
working to get there, but
Yep.
it's going to take
Perfect.
some time.
Okay,
Rahul.
so, yeah, so I think while they're looking for that, I'll just briefly, in 5 minutes, I would like to say what we have been doing. So our main, so my story is we devised a system where we can use ICT to serve the underserved. So with a long-term, so the people who do not have access to quality healthcare, we are trying to provide healthcare to them through ICT technologies. So the long-term goal is to help achieve universal health coverage in Bangladesh with a special focus on the disadvantaged population. And our major focus started in ready-made garment factories, because as you know that this ready-made garment factories is the main export earning sources in Bangladesh. And then, so there are 4 million people working there, 16 million people directly dependent on that, and it's a $26 billion going to be $40 or $50 billion industry. So the 4 million workers are there, and 64% of them are reproductive age women. And that 64% reproductive age women, they work long hours, they usually do not have access to quality health care, they don't have time to go for seeking, and then they have a weekly holiday, one day, and that time everything is closed, and all the NGOs for last 20, 30 years, they are working in the slum areas when they are not there. So they are, the weekly off day, they are not available. So what we devised, we took, as Anil pointed out, that we took the health service to them. So through that, we devised a mobile clinic, on-site mobile clinic. So the teams go there. You just need 3 health workers, 1 paramedic or physician, and they are connected with, so let me show you since it came. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So I'll just quickly forward this. This I already talked. So what we did, this is a health clinic, that mobile on-site health clinic. So we have 4 stations: height, weight, blood pressure, blood glucose, and there is a physician with a family history and all those. So main target is NCD, non-communicable disease, hypertension, diabetes. So it's an annual screening one time, and then you get all the data through tab-based in the electronic medical record. So you don't need an internet. We have a local Wi-Fi router to create an internet kind of environment, so they're connected. And these teams can do, like with a two parallel teams, you can do 300 to 500 workers in one factory per day. And all data will be in the electronic medical record saved in database. This is a kind of practical situation that the left. There are two parallel stations, so same station, like two parallel stations, and patients are, the workers are coming from that door, and then they are going one after another. And at the end table, you can see that there is a laptop, and that's connecting all the tabs. So this is a schematic version, like what they do. And then finally, when they come to the doctor, they can, or paramedic, they can prescribe, and then the prescription is printed. They get a health card, and their central database, the data are stored. You can communicate with them with SMS, the workers directly, and you can arrange follow-up depending on their screening results if they need it. And so this is the health card, digital health card they receive. So it has their national ID number, it has a barcode, their picture, and also fingerprint is recorded. So anywhere they go, if you just get a fingerprint, you have authorized access. There is a layered access. No, not everyone can access. The worker can access and the doctor. And this is a patient summary. There are flags. You can see if there is a high blood pressure or high blood glucose. So there will be an auto-flagging system. So this system, we already served 6,000 garment factory workers in Bangladesh last year. This year, we are already planning to do 9,000 garment factory workers. Last year, we also served 1,200 rickshaw pullers. And all these data, this is longitudinal follow-up, patient tracking. So you can track patients longitudinally. And also, you can refer the patients to nearby centers. So we map the referral centers, government centers, BRAC, for tuberculosis. And then finally, I'd like to mention one point, that this is another great example of Bangladesh rising. Because as you know, then from August 25th, 2017, last year, there are 680,000 people from Myanmar. They are forcibly displaced, called Rohingya refugee or forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. They came to the southern coastal region of Bangladesh. You can see on the left upper side that the little yellowish color thing there. So that part is Cox's Bazar. So they came, and they're almost 1 million people in 6,000 acre area. So Bangladesh government responded very efficiently. This is another example because they have a system in place. So what Bangladesh government and Bangladeshi people showed is an outstanding example of compassion and resounding solidarity. And with this, I think they actually prevented several outbreaks. There were a diphtheria outbreak, which is rare. You would never heard of those things here now. So there was a diphtheria outbreak because they didn't have any vaccination since 1982. But Bangladesh government, with the assistance of international organization, humanitarian, and our organization also, which is called Health and Education for All. So we managed everything. And there are two medical teams working there since October. Our teams, they serve 23,000 patients, all longitudinal, all patient records are there. And how we are doing it? Because these are deforested land, so there is no electricity, there is no internet, just recently deforested just to accommodate them. So we are using their solar panel. You can see the solar panel, the same technology we used in ready-made garment factories. Solar panel, then connecting with the tabs, and then you can have a Wi-Fi router, and that's connecting the whole thing. So this is ongoing process, and with that, I'd like to end. At the final point is we have been awarded Grand Challenge Canada this year, so we'll be serving 9,000 garment factory workers using this technology in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you. Mashroof, please.
Well, what can I say that's not been said? My background is actually in aviation, as Stuart had mentioned.
Yeah.
That's what pays the bills, or half of it. My real passion is in technology. So coming straight to the point on how I think technology can empower community in the country, we now live in a time which is more so could be labeled as a digital democracy, where citizens have the tools and the rights to decide what they want, when they want, and how they want it. And the way that has enabled it is basically thinking it from this side, that people in Bangladesh now can actually get their food delivered, get their rides like Uber and Pathao deliver whenever they want to, do their shoppings online, or do anything, whatever they want to do it on their own, make a decision on their own and not really rely on anyone else. So this digital democracy is going to spread, should spread not just within the confines of the urban cities of Dhaka or Chittagong, but to every corner of the country. So what this would enable is, in line with digital democracy, we need to think of the fourth industrial revolution. Sooner or later, the garments workers, the women and men who are working in the garments factories or heavy industrial factories are going to be replaced with automation. So what is going to happen at that point, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? That jobs in manufacturing will deplete, but a new segment will come up, and that's the on-demand economy. What on-demand service providers, like the e-commerce companies or delivery companies in Bangladesh would enable is a lot of new workforce growth in that trend, which can be a part of BPO, but again, BPO will not be human-based in 20 years. It's going to be natural language processing. We won't be actually speaking. In US now, a lot of people don't even speak to a real person when they call any customer service. And sooner or later, that trend's going to go to Bangladesh as well. So a new segment of economy needs to develop. And how do you make sure that transition of these millions of workforce that you have that are really centered towards the main urban cities get decentralized, but be a part of a system where they can basically either run their own business or be employed so that they are in the workforce. But that workforce will not be defined by manufacturing, but as I said, as a different segment of an on-demand economy. Where I think the critical part comes in right now is to get them ready is the training part. Something which, a product, for example, which A2I had done, I believe it's X Shop. It's something where farmers or people from rural parts of the country can sell their products directly to the consumers through an e-commerce platform. While it's a great idea and a product by itself, but to really have a full success rate at it, you need to have an intensive training program that goes to the grassroots level of the country. And to enable that to happen, to your point, you need internet connectivity, which covers all areas where people are accessible, who can access the internet and actually know how to use the platform to sell whatever they want, at whatever price they think is fair, the market's going to be willing to pay for. And that's going to be a vital shift that needs to happen in Bangladesh for the country to just not to go from a middle income to a high income country, but because we need to understand that when a country transcends from middle income to high income, all the auxiliary costs with it do go up. And sooner or later, manufacturing costs would go up, labor costs would go up, and there has to be an augmentation of this workforce. And that's where I think basic training, all through from rural parts to urban parts is essentially important to make sure that a kind of a virtual industry sets up in those regions as well. And we just don't see the on-demand economy or Ubers and Pathaos just centered towards one mega city of Dhaka, but multiple mega cities are created within the country, which would enable the on-demand companies to scale and the population as well to get engaged with it. For example, in the US, a lot of people have multiple jobs. Someone's driving an Uber car in the end of a shift and working in HP or IBM even. In Bangladesh, that needs to start happening. So we want to see women working in the garments factories in day, maybe driving Uber cars at night or Pathao bikes at night. I don't know, something, being involved in multiple areas, because they need to augment their profession looking at 20, 30 years from now. So that's my 2 cents on technology.
So if I thank you. So if I tried to draw some common theme, and pose a question that would cut across everything that we've heard, let me try and see if we can have some discussion about that in the time remaining. It might go something like this, that the digital revolution is in full swing, right? No one can, and we can see that it's progressing very rapidly. and will continue to, right? To the point where very soon there'll be theoretical 100% people will have access, right? Whether it's affordable or not is a different question, but the technical access will be there. More and more we're seeing services being delivered, right, digitally and very creatively through, kind of distributed and even a micro-entrepreneur model, kind of delivery of services, be they government services, be they healthcare and so forth. And that by itself is a really important innovation, right, because it, first of all, it's much more efficient, but it also enables people, right? That is enabling in and of itself, right? As far as stimulation of economic activity and a more sustainable form of development. But, right? So I think this is where the question comes in. It's and I think the idea of incubating innovations, right? That probably has more of a a little more of a top-down feel to it, right? So I think about the very last thing that you said, right? Which is how do we get to the level where the digital revolution really enables bottom-up entrepreneurship, right? It really enables the little guy, right, to not only be better served, right, and to have access to healthcare and so forth, very important, but also how does it become an enabling factor for actual development of new economic activity? I mean, I think back to Grameenphone, right? That was one of the things that Grameenphone, right? It had that, it was sort of baked into the business model. And baked into the business model was also empowerment of women, right? At least at one level during the the phone lady days, right? So how do we think about, there's a role for government, right? But there's also just a role, I think, for, there's a business model innovation element here, right? That to think about how do we get after this goal of really enabling bottom-up, kind of entrepreneurship and economic development in order to realize the real potential of the digital revolution? It seems to me that's what it is, right? So, I mean, that's my attempt at an integrative question. Your thoughts?
Who do you want to start?
Anyone who would like. Yeah, we can be conversational.
I think if I add, I think in terms of getting the grassroots level up,
Yeah.
it's important that incubation happens from civil and government level, not just in, again, as I said, not just centered towards Dhaka, but through other districts in the country as well, where there are educational institutions and a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs who may have great ideas, but just does not have the access or the mentoring that he needs to really fulfill
Yeah.
those ideas into bigger companies.
How does the country begin to identify entrepreneurs from the bottom up, right? Would be another way to ask the question, right? That there's improved, digital delivery of education, which is great, right? And that elevates people to a certain level. But in some ways, entrepreneurs make themselves known, right? I mean, how does digital enable the identification of tomorrow's entrepreneurs? To me, that's the real question. Yeah.
Well, it's not a very clear answer, first of all. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, we just do X, Y, and Z. It's not. It's a lot more complex. The way I like to describe is that imagine a puzzle, and there's all these different pieces of the puzzle. And we have to work on each of the pieces. And sometimes, if one of the pieces of the puzzle is not taken care of, the whole thing actually crumbles, or it doesn't move as fast as we would wish. And so, for example, he was just talking about transferring or migrating women garment workers to a tech-based opportunity. Mm-hmm. That's all beautiful. Do they have, first of all, access? Can they afford? I can tell you that the numbers for Bangladesh that we know very well, we work with them every day. It's one of the things that we're very passionate about is changing that picture. And that's why we're working in Bangladesh to do that. But the numbers, the aggregate numbers of the country actually mask the reality in your country, most of you here, which is of incredible economic inequalities, of incredible income inequality, of really, despite a lot of progress for women's empowerment, great gender inequality, and lack of skills that are still really a barrier to a lot of these opportunities. So first of all, we need to look at all of those things. Are the basis, are the foundation items there, so we can start building the building blocks?
Yeah.
And then as we build the building blocks, again, to his example, and to also your example of healthcare and Anir's, examples of all the multiple things that access to information is doing, we can't think of all those things without thinking now about creating a system that not only people come online and have access, maybe they will be able to afford, which is great, or they'll go to centers where it's free and or low cost, but are they safe? Is there privacy? Are they able to engage with technology in a way that they can actually be creative? Do they have the skills? So the pieces of the puzzle are making sure that their digital skills provision. That's where a lot of partnerships come in, right? That there's new services being developed, like Raul's the example, many of the, and the 168 services that are being provided, so that people engage with those things and feel comfortable, and then they can be the innovators, the creators, the new thinkers, right? That will. But the reality is that right now. I would love to hear from some of the people here in the room that told us about some of their experiences with entrepreneurs. How hard is it, or how easy is it to find those incredible entrepreneurs out there in the market?
That's the question.
Right. If it was
So-
easy, I think it would be easy to bring them up. But we need to figure out a better way of bringing those to the center, to the core of these questions. And I think maybe some have the answers here.
We run this fund called the Innovation Fund. And the way it works is the innovator, not always an entrepreneur, would come up with a problem and then a solution. And then recently we've started twisting that a little bit by calling it a challenge fund, where we publish the problem and innovators come in with solutions.
Yep.
So we've tried that with the challenge fund, we've tried it with surface water irrigation. Lots of innovative proposals have come in from local entrepreneurs.
Yep.
In the Innovation Fund, we've received over the last 5 years about 4,000 proposals. We funded close to 200. And they range from micro dredging to fuel from plastics to solving different problems that the government is having, so through public-private partnership. But one thing that we have faced as a big challenge is developing their business skills. So they come up with a solution, it's a good prototype, and recently we've started actually grooming them from mentors from the industry and academia as well, in the iLab that we have set up in the Science Ministry. But developing that into a viable commercial solution that makes money and sustain itself is the challenge that we're facing. So innovators stop short of being entrepreneurs. So they're not, most of them are not entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
Often they don't want to be.
Yeah.
The few that want to be entrepreneurs worry about their intellectual property. For instance, the three Malaysian, the three awards that the three entrepreneurs, innovators received yesterday, one innovator actually was chosen to go with her very innovative solution of sanitary napkins. But she didn't want to go because she didn't want to share her IP with the government because because she got funded by the government. And she said that I'm not going to share my IP. I got funded to develop the prototype, but I want to build a business myself. And she didn't want to go to the Malaysian competition. She would have won for sure.
Right.
But her innovation was better than the three that got the awards.
Yeah.
So IP is also another important point.
So it's really
Protection.
two different tracks we're talking about, right? So I think, like we were, Iqbal and I were just in India a couple of weeks back we had this Base of the Pyramid Global Network Summit, and Anil Gupta, right, is there and people are familiar with Gupta, and the Honeybee Network, right? And so this is grassroots innovation, right? And he's been very successful in India in cataloging thousands of these innovations.
But again, the business model issue.
And then, but the real key is entrepreneurship, right? So, okay, so you can, and digital is assisting that, right? So you can gather up these grassroots, but how do you animate them, right? Becomes the question. Sure. But then you have this other track, right? Which is focused on education from the ground up, and you have very interesting initiatives like then we've heard about it from, right? That even right here on the panel. such that, yeah, and it's engaging women, right, in a very important way from an educational point of view. Like in India, there's this very interesting venture called Head Held High, which has a very innovative, like in a 12-month period, it can take a person to be job ready, right, in terms of reading and speaking English, and having office skills and so forth. That group now has gone through probably 5,000 or so. And initially they look like entrepreneurs, but they're necessity-based entrepreneurs. So not surprisingly, the result of the program: 99% of the people just want a job, a dependable job. But 1% don't, right? 1% of the people that come up through a program like that aren't satisfied just getting a job. They're entrepreneurs, right? So there's this other track which can be digitally assisted, that begins to turn up entrepreneurs, but they may or may not really have an idea, right? And then you've got these inventors, how do you get these two tracks together?
In the case of the digital center entrepreneurs, we've had more success. So the condition was that they would have to be entrepreneurs. The ones that would not be entrepreneurs would just get weeded out.
Yep.
Because there is no financial support. They're running a business out of a government office. They're micro-entrepreneurs, and they have to sell the services. Some of these are government services, some of these are private sector services. They charge a small fee, and that's how they sustain themselves. Mm-hmm. So the entrepreneurial skills, such as managing a business, attracting customers, ensuring quality, and then following up and expanding the business, the ones that survived as businesses are the true entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
the ones got weeded out, and then we brought in new people who then started doing the same thing. Again, so this cycle has been repeated several times in the last 8 years in 4,500 rural locations and 700 urban locations. Rural ones succeeded better because the need to get services locally rather than going to 40-kilometer distance to a government office multiple times was higher. Willingness to pay was higher, even though income was lower in rural areas. But these digital center entrepreneurs became true entrepreneurs. So out of these 5,000 locations, I would say about 3,000 have become fully financially sustainable. And the others require some sort of subsidy, and then we are trying to weed out again. So it's a continuous process.
Yep.
But we've learned one thing or two about what entrepreneurship really means at the grassroots level.
Yep.
Using digital technologies to serve people with public and private services.
Yep. Last question before we go ahead, Iqbal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the speakers group.
Microphone.
Sorry.
Microphone.
The speaker group that has come here from Bangladesh, they have formed a WhatsApp group. Okay. And this is I understand that this is a highly skilled group. That they have been able to create a peer-to-peer group, but nonetheless they are keeping in touch with it themselves, and it is a little bit of a bottom-up innovations that is within the platform of WhatsApp. Okay. Similarly, I do think in India, in Bangladesh, young people, high school kids or lower level, are forming those kind of WhatsApp groups as a peer-to-peer teaching things, okay, about information, specialization and all that. But what I'm trying to get at, that this kind of things will devolve as things become more sophisticated and people learn more about how to handle these things. So lower skill level people will be able to do these peer-to-peer groups. And that is one example of entrepreneurial, bottom-up entrepreneurship within the platforms that are emerging. WhatsApp is just an example. And people are exchanging photographs, various things. How is my crop? How is my chicken? These kind of things. So I can imagine these kind of things will happen because the facilities have already spread.
The digital entrepreneurs that I talk about, they have had a blog and a Facebook group. First a blog for a few years and then a Facebook group for the last 4 or 5 years to basically empower each other. And that's what also, so you're very right, that's what has empowered them to be entrepreneurs as well, supported them.
I mean, just a quick plug on that. I mean, I think what you're saying is absolutely right, and it's happening. What we've seen in many situations, and this is not just in Bangladesh, but in many countries where we work around the global south, is that even when that is the case, you still need to have that sure market for those entrepreneurs. okay? So if we don't think, that's why to me that idea of a puzzle is so important, because you can have all these great innovation taking place, but if you don't have the recipient market to enjoy that, you still are going to be struggling as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur and the skills of an entrepreneur are not just about learning how to make your business plan. It's about understanding in the digital space, how can you reach out to your potential customers, to the people that are going to benefit from either being an app, a new invention, or what have you. And that's why you have to work on all of those pieces. We've seen that in countries like, for example, Nigeria, which I think someone else used as an interesting comparison to Bangladesh, I think maybe the minister earlier, we've seen that even when there were some very interesting innovations taking place, in fact, some of them financed and subsidized by the government to support innovation, they were not able to get to market. They were not able to get to the scale at the marketplace that was possible. Why? Because in Nigeria, very similarly to Bangladesh, 80% of the population lives under the poverty line. That 80% of the population is not even coming close to being able to access the platform where those services are being provided. So if we're not seeing both at the same time, we actually could be supporting an entrepreneurship for failure.
I understand your point that this, you're giving us a dose of reality in the midst of all the rosy pictures. I understand that.
It's a balance. It's
No,
just-
I understand. I appreciate that. But what I am failing to understand is that I'm still not getting a specific example of what your organization has done that dramatically altered that. So let's say only 20% get this, but you did X, Y, Z,
Yep.
and suddenly it rose to 30%.
Exactly.
What is that? Give me an example.
I'll give you a few examples on how those things work in the policy space, right? And hopefully others will have some good examples. So one is to make sure that the investment is there at a much more cost-effective way through very strong policy and regulation that not only attracts investment, but makes sure that that investment, when it goes back to the user in terms of services and access, is at a much lower price. So one good example of that is through infrastructure sharing. How can we make sure that there's very strong infrastructure sharing in the planning stages so that when the services get to the user, instead of paying 20% of their monthly income on access to the platform, they're actually only paying 1% or even less.
But
So
what's
that's
the
one.
example of
Another
that?
one, sorry?
What is the example of that? I understand
So-
in concept those things would work.
That's exactly what countries are doing. In fact, Bangladesh is, through the digital Bangladesh vision, putting in place a lot of thinking that is going to change that kind of framework. So it's not just on an investment side, it's also changing on the quality of service. I'm sure you know better than I, when you go to Bangladesh, a lot of people buy the service and then cannot rely on the service because of quality of service. I can tell you that, for example, the regulatory authority in Bangladesh is now working on a very strong quality of service framework to try to change that picture, to make sure that those that buy the service are actually buying what they get, right? Another thing, another good example that people normally relate to very well. Services are expensive, data plans are expensive, but so are the devices, right? Here we are. I'm sure most of you have devices on your hands today. Most of these devices are very expensive. So one of the things that government does is changing, for example, the fiscal policy that affects those devices so that instead of the device being, say, $200 or $100 or the lowest cost smart device that is possible to have in the Bangladeshi market is about what? $40, $50, a real working quality device. Very few people can afford that. So by changing the fiscal framework behind that, say lowering 20%, 30%, and in Bangladesh that's an issue, as you know, that could go a long way. For example, we were able to, in Ghana, to reduce the cost of mobile smartphone devices by 20%. From changing the taxation that is imposed on the devices as they come into the country. And that drastically changes the ability of, it's not the same as going from, 100 to 20, but you're moving, right? You're moving the needle so that the price to the user becomes a lot more closer to the possibilities. But that's not the only thing. This is why the centers that A2I are working are so critical, because when you have very large levels of poverty and very low incomes, the best solution is a public access solution. And so the access to information digital centers are actually, for the characteristics of the population, of the majority of the population, the most interesting solution to provide that access.
Good. So given the time, thank you for that. We're going to take one last comment, and then I think we'll look to close the session.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Very interesting discussion. And, we have been, in the discussion that we have, the focus is on entrepreneurship. Focus has been on innovation. In terms of the realities of Bangladesh, you see, it's like whether you are fishing in the wild or you are also fishing in aquaculture. Does entrepreneurs develop in nature, or you have to have some way of developing entrepreneurship? So I believe if you look at the situation in Bangladesh and the transformation that we need in the future, we need, as I said in the morning session, that we need new generation of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And in the days to come, many of those will be using this information and communication technologies in order to engage in their own areas of interest. And I believe that we need to have a proactive entrepreneurship development program. Look at the education system, in Bangladesh. You see, whole education system is geared to produce people who will be seeking job rather than creating one. So that is why I believe that we need to have.
The entire education system in the world.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
Business schools don't create entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
HBS doesn't create entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
IBA doesn't create entrepreneurs.
Exactly. That is why we have to have, because you see, we have very limited time span in order to achieve the national as well as the global goals. Whether it's SDG or we are working on business for SDGs and how to engage the business for SDGs. So what I'm saying is we have to have a new entrepreneurship development program in the country, and we look at countries like Israel.
Or at least an entrepreneurship detection program.
Well, detection. Well, because I believe. You see, the basis of entrepreneurship is have an idea in any area in which one can think of doing things better or doing better things. It's very close to innovation, and everybody has that, I believe. And everybody has fire in the belly, and we need something that ignites that. And that is what I believe is important. And instead of identifying entrepreneurs which comes in nature, we have to go for developing entrepreneurship. That is what I'm saying.
Thank
Otherwise,
you.
see, if we,
Fair enough.
depend on entrepreneurship that develop in nature, probably will be falling short of entrepreneurship that we need in order to transform the society the way and the speed at which we need to transform. Thank you.
sir.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
let's give Stuart the last word, and then we'll wrap it up. You've had the last word.
The last word has been had.
Thank
I
you very
believe.
much, Stuart. Great panel, very stimulating. So that wraps it up, and thank you all for sticking out. It was a stimulating day. I want to thank both Iqbal Kadir and Iqbal Yosef for their incredible work in organizing this and bringing in all these distinguished speakers and attendees. And I just say that, the good news from all this is the hearing about the state of the Bangladesh economy and its incredible ramp it's been on. But the even better news is it seems like it's really in gear to keep accelerating. I mean, there's so many good, just a couple of bullet points that came away about it, that I think this is from Khalid Kadir about the predictable rate of growth over the last 10 or even 20 years. It's just unbelievable. Not many countries have achieved that. And it's also a very balanced growth. It's getting more and more balanced. The FDI interest, where I know it's not as where people would like it to be, but I think the interest is there, and just maybe the infrastructure to, or the capital markets to pull it in are not well developed. The economic zones, the power explosion, which is really spectacular, and the 100-year vision, which is moving Bangladesh from milestone to milestone rapidly. So anyway, all great, exciting stuff, and thank you for coming and sticking with it.